There comes a moment when even the kindest heart decides it's done bleeding. She gave chances, forgave lies, and prayed through the pain, until the whisper in her soul grew louder than the narcissist's control. This isn't just about a breakup. This is about divine intervention. Because when a super empath walks away, she doesn't just leave the narcissist behind. She walks straight into the arms of God. And that's when everything changes. The narcissist doesn't realize it yet, but the supply is gone, the energy is cut, and the games no longer work. What made her stay for so long? What finally pushed her to walk away? And why did God allow the pain, only to remove her at exactly the right time? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you won't just understand the power of walking away. You'll feel it in your bones. If this story mirrors your soul even a little, type "God pulled me out" in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because someone out there needs to hear what you already know deep down. Your escape was sacred. At first, everything looked fine on the outside. She smiled when she was supposed to. She answered texts quickly, made dinner on time, and stayed quiet during the small, cutting remarks that used to sting but had started to feel normal. To the world, it seemed like she had it all together. A loyal partner, a functioning relationship, a home. But inside, something had begun to shift. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, subtle. Her soul, once so full of light and belief, had started whispering, just a soft nudge that something was deeply wrong. It wasn't one thing she could point to. It was the way her spirit felt heavy, the way her laughter didn't come as easily, the way she braced herself every time his name lit up a phone. Something wasn't right, but she pushed that feeling down. After all, she had always been the fixer, the one who gave the benefit of the doubt, the one who believed that love could heal even the ugliest wounds. But over time, the whispers got louder, not in words, but in silence, in sleepless nights, in mornings where she couldn't recognize the woman in the mirror. She wasn't broken, but she was tired. Tired of being blamed for things she didn't do. Tired of apologizing just to keep the peace. Tired of carrying both her own emotions and his. The narcissist had made sure she questioned everything. Her feelings, her memories, even her worth. That's the thing with a narcissist. They don't need fists to wound you. They use words, silence, control, and confusion. And for someone with a heart as soft as haze, it was like death by 1,000 paper cuts. She began to notice how she stopped speaking her truth because it always led to conflict. How she'd walk on eggshells to avoid the next mood swing. How she'd plan her days around avoiding tension. At first, she thought she was being kind, loving, patient. But eventually, she saw it for what it was: survival. She wasn't being loved. She was being drained. And when she turned to others for help, she was often met with confusion. "He seems so nice. Are you sure you're not being too sensitive?" But deep down, she knew. This wasn't love. This was spiritual warfare wearing the mask of a relationship. Then something divine happened. It wasn't lightning or fire. It was a moment, a breaking point, a whisper that came with absolute clarity. "You weren't made to suffer like this." That was God. Not with thunder, but with truth. A quiet knowing that no longer allowed her to pretend. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even explain herself. One day, she simply decided, "I'm done." She didn't pack in rage. She didn't slam the door. She left in peace. And that peace screamed louder than any fight ever could. The narcissist didn't understand it. He never thought she'd leave. Why would she? He'd conditioned her to think she needed him. That without him, she was nothing. He underestimated the strength of a soul backed by God. Because when God steps in, no manipulation works. The silent treatment, she welcomed the silence. The guilt trips, fell flat. The love bombing, too late. She had seen behind the mask. And once you see, you can't unsee. In the days that followed, she didn't crumble like he expected. She rested. She healed. She cried in private, yes, but not because she missed him. She cried because she had stayed so long in a place where love was used as a weapon. She cried for all the times she betrayed her own spirit just to keep someone else comfortable. And in those tears, healing flowed. God wasn't punishing her with heartbreak. He was freeing her. He didn't remove her because she failed. He removed her because her assignment in that relationship was done. She had learned what she needed to learn. She had given what she could give. And now, it was time to come home to herself. People began to notice the change in her. Her eyes got brighter. Her laugh returned. She started doing small things again. Things she once loved but had forgotten in the chaos. She walked slower, breathed deeper. The world felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. She had come face to face with the darkest parts of someone else, and survived. No, more than survived. She rose. The narcissist. He struggled. He scrambled. He tried to replace her quickly. But no one offered the same energy, the same depth, the same light. Because what he lost wasn't just a person. It was a divine covering. What she gave wasn't just love. It was sacred. And once she walked away, that blessing was gone with her. That's the thing about a super empath. She carries heaven with her. And when she walks away, God walks with her. But here's what most don't understand. Walking away isn't weakness. It's strength. It's wisdom. It's trust in something bigger. It's realizing that healing doesn't come from staying and fixing someone else. It comes from choosing yourself, choosing peace, choosing God. It comes from listening to the still, small voice inside that says, "This is not where your story ends." Her story continued, of course. But now, she was the author. No longer reacting to someone else's chaos, but creating a life rooted in purpose, joy, and truth. And when she looks back, she doesn't hate the narcissist. She doesn't even resent the pain. Because without it, she wouldn't have awakened. Without it, she may never have heard the voice of God whispering, "You are more. You are mine. It's time to go." And so she went. She was the kind of woman who made others feel seen, even when she felt invisible. Always showing up, always smiling. She kept things together so well that no one questioned her pain. But behind that carefully crafted smile lived a storm no one ever saw. Not even those closest to her. It wasn't loud, dramatic suffering. It was quiet, deep. The kind of suffering that doesn't show up in tears, but in weariness. A tiredness that lives in your bones. She'd sit in rooms full of people and still feel like she was fading. Every day, she was pouring from a cup that hadn't been full in years. She couldn't explain it, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't know how. How do you put into words the feeling of slowly disappearing while still being present for everyone else? The narcissist had created a reality where she was always the problem. He would twist facts, deny things he clearly said, make her feel crazy for reacting to cruelty. It wasn't just gaslighting. It was spiritual erosion. Over time, she started doubting her own instincts. She'd replay conversations in her head over and over, trying to figure out if she was being too sensitive or if he was truly being cruel. That's the most painful part of emotional abuse. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It seeps in slowly, like poison dressed as love. And no one saw it, because she didn't show it. To the outside world, he looked charming, attentive, maybe even protective. But no one saw the way he chipped away at her soul in private. The way he would praise her one moment and destroy her the next. The way he'd isolate her emotionally while convincing her she was too emotional. She tried so hard to fix it. Read books. Prayed harder. Took the blame. Told herself this was just a phase. Or maybe she needed to be more patient. More understanding. More of something. But the more she gave, the more it took from her. She'd wake up in the morning already tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of walking on eggshells. From the pressure of managing someone else's emotions while ignoring her own. She laughed when expected, hugged when asked, agreed to keep the peace. But inside, she felt like a ghost of herself. She couldn't cry in front of anyone because even she didn't fully understand the heaviness she carried. And the few times she tried to speak up, she was met with dismissal. You're too emotional. You're overthinking. It's not that bad. So she learned to stay silent, to wear the mask, to suffer quietly. And in that silence, her spirit grew weary, not just emotionally, but spiritually. She stopped hearing her own voice. She stopped trusting her own feelings. She stopped praying like she used to. Not because she stopped believing, but because she felt unheard. She wondered if God had forgotten her. If maybe this was the life she was supposed to accept. Maybe some people just live quietly hurting forever. That's how deep the confusion ran. That's how far the fatigue reached. But God hadn't forgotten. He was watching, even in the silence. He saw every moment she swallowed her truth to avoid another argument. He saw every night she cried alone, trying to hold the weight of a love that kept wounding her. He saw her giving, over and over, with nothing in return but manipulation and blame. She thought no one saw, but heaven did. And though it didn't feel like it, every silent moment of suffering was building towards something greater. A breaking point. A turning point. A divine interruption. Because even when you can't hear God, He is still moving. And He was moving for her. Slowly, gently, preparing her heart to one day say, no more. Preparing her to rise, not in anger, but in peace. Not in chaos, but in clarity. But before the rising comes the breaking. And in those silent seasons of suffering, she was breaking. Not in a way that destroyed her, but in a way that stripped everything false from her life. The lies, the masks, the illusions of love. It all had to fall away before she could truly hear the truth. The truth that love should not leave you confused. That peace is not earned by shrinking yourself. That God did not create her to be someone's emotional punching bag. The truth that being spiritual does not mean staying silent in abuse. That patience does not mean tolerating harm. The truth that she mattered to. And when that truth finally broke through the silence, something shifted. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't dramatic. But she started listening to herself again. Feeling again. Remembering again. Who she was. Who she was. And slowly, she stopped smiling to hide her pain. She stopped pretending everything was okay. She started showing up for herself. Not loudly, but honestly. And that was the beginning of the end. Not of her, but of the suffering. Because when the silence breaks, the healing begins. It took her a long time to realize it wasn't just emotional pain. It was something much deeper. Something that lingered even when the shouting stopped. Something that followed her into her dreams, into her prayers, into the quiet moments when no one else was around. What she thought was just confusion or heartbreak began to feel like a spiritual war zone. This wasn't just a broken relationship. This was warfare against her light, her purpose, her calling. The narcissist didn't only hurt her feelings. He targeted her identity. Slowly, and without her even realizing, his manipulation began to pull her away from herself and from God. His words didn't just cut her down. They made her doubt her worth, her clarity, and even her ability to hear divine guidance. She had once been a woman of deep discernment, intuitive, spiritually in tune. But after enough gaslighting, she started questioning everything. Was it God speaking, or just her overthinking? Was she discerning darkness, or being too sensitive? That's how spiritual warfare works. It clouds the connection between your soul and your source. And that's exactly what the narcissist's energy did. Confuse her spirit, disorient her intuition, and make her forget how powerful she truly was. It wasn't just the arguments or the cold silences. It was the way he drained her soul after every interaction. The way her body felt heavier after being around him. The way she'd walk away from a conversation, feeling like her spirit had been yanked out and stomped on. Narcissistic abuse doesn't just happen on the surface. It digs its claws into your energy field. It feeds off your compassion, your kindness, your empathy. And for someone like her, a super empath, that meant she was being spiritually devoured little by little. She kept trying to be the light in his darkness. But the truth was, he wasn't looking for healing. He was feeding on her light to avoid facing his own shadows. And that was the shift. The moment she realized this wasn't just about toxic love, it was about a battle for her soul. Every time she tried to speak truth, he twisted it. Every time she asked for kindness, he turned it into weakness. Every boundary she set was broken, then blamed on her. This wasn't just about emotional immaturity. It was about spiritual manipulation. The kind that wears a mask and says all the right things when it needs to. The kind that plays the victim when confronted. The kind that uses guilt like a knife. She had thought she was fighting for the relationship, but really, she was fighting for her freedom. And it wasn't just him. The energy in the entire relationship was like a fog. Heavy, confusing, spiritually suffocating. She found herself disconnected from her intuition, doubting her prayers, feeling further and further from God. She couldn't even recognize herself anymore. She felt cut off from joy, from clarity, from truth. That's when she started to realize this wasn't just about a man. This was a spiritual attack, a distraction meant to silence her voice, dim her light, and keep her stuck in cycles that made her forget who she really was. But God never let go. Even when she felt alone, even when she thought she had failed, even when she couldn't hear him clearly, he was still there, watching, waiting, covering her, even in the shadows. And then came the shift. One day, she felt it, a staring deep in her chest. Not loud, but firm, like a light being relit inside her. It said enough. It said, this is not your battle anymore. It said, you are not called to fight for someone who keeps choosing darkness. And that was when she saw it clearly. Not with her eyes, but with her spirit. She had been under attack, not just emotionally, but spiritually. And the only way out was to walk away. So she did. Not because she gave up, but because she finally remembered what she was fighting for. Her peace, her purpose, her soul. She walked away, not as a victim, but as a warrior who chose light over illusion, truth over manipulation, God over chaos. And in that moment, the spiritual war lost its power over her. Because once you see it for what it is, you can no longer be fooled by it. What once had her bound was now behind her. And her spirit. Free. Clay. Reconnected. She thought no one saw. That was one of the most painful parts of it all. Not just the betrayal or the manipulation, but the feeling of being completely alone in it. She would cry in silence, wiping her tears before anyone else could notice. She would sit in a room with people who loved her, wearing a smile that kept them from asking too many questions. On the outside, she seemed strong, put together, maybe even happy. But on the inside, her heart was quietly breaking, again and again. Every insult, every time her words were twisted, every time she was blamed for things she never did, it chipped away at her. And even though she tried to keep her face strong, there were nights when she would look up at the ceiling in the dark and whisper, God, are you even here? She didn't want attention. She didn't need the world to understand. But she needed to know that someone, somewhere, saw what she was going through. That someone cared. That it all wasn't for nothing. And the truth is, he did. God saw every single moment. He was there for the nights she fell asleep with a wet pillow, pretending everything was fine the next day. He was there when she shrank herself just to avoid another argument. He was there when she questioned her own mind, wondering if maybe she really was too much or too sensitive like the narcissist claimed. He was there when she stopped praying like she used to because she felt too tired, too worn out, too unseen. But even in those quiet, fragile moments, God never looked away. She might have felt abandoned by people, misunderstood by friends, invalidated by the narcissist who claimed to love her. But heaven took note. Every single time. Because God doesn't just see actions, He sees the heart. He knew she was trying. He knew she stayed not out of weakness, but because her love was genuine. Her loyalty was deep. Her forgiveness was real. She kept believing he would change. She kept hoping the good in him would rise to the surface. But what she didn't yet realize was that God was never disappointed in her for staying. He understood why she stayed. He saw her intentions. He knew her heart was soft, her spirit kind, her love pure. And that's exactly why He was preparing a way out. God does not ignore pain. He collects every tear. He hears every silent scream. He sees every invisible bruise on the soul. And when the world doesn't step in, He does. Not always right away. Not always with flashing signs or booming voices. But slowly, quietly, in ways she couldn't yet see. He was shifting things behind the scenes, making her uncomfortable in places she used to tolerate, opening her eyes to patterns she used to excuse, strengthening her in small, quiet moments, so when the time came, she would be strong enough to leave, and not just walk away, but never go back. What the narcissist didn't know, what he could never control, was that she was God's daughter. She was never alone. Every insult he threw at her, God saw it. Every moment he blamed her, belittled her, played mind games, God remembered. And while the narcissist thought he was winning, manipulating, controlling, God was simply watching, allowing it for a season, yes, but not forever. Because God allows lessons, not lifelong suffering. He will let you walk through fire, but only to refine you, not destroy you. She began to notice the shift before she even understood what it was. Small things, like how she no longer cried over his words the way she used to. Like how she stopped trying to explain herself to someone who only heard what he wanted to. Like how her prayers returned, not desperate this time, but clear. She wasn't begging for change anymore. She was asking for strength, for direction, for peace. And that prayer, God answered, not with more time to fix him, but with clarity to release him. And in that moment, when she finally chose herself, heaven moved. Things started falling apart quickly after that. Or rather, falling into place. Doors she had once knocked on without response began opening. Her energy returned. Her sleep improved. She laughed again, really laughed. Not because the circumstances had changed overnight, but because she had. And deep down, she knew God had been waiting for this moment all along. The moment she would stop trying to heal what was never hers to carry. The moment she'd stop seeing herself as broken and start seeing herself as chosen. The moment she would finally believe that the pain wasn't punishment. It was preparation. She had to go through it to understand her own strength. She had to lose herself to remember who she was in him. And God had been there, every step of the way. Not controlling her, not forcing her, but guiding her gently, sometimes through pain, sometimes through peace, but always with love. And now, standing on the other side, she didn't feel bitter. She didn't even hate him. What she felt was sacred. A quiet knowing that she had been protected, even when she didn't feel it. Cared, even when she didn't see it. Watched, even when she thought she was alone. So if you've ever wondered if God sees what you're going through, He does. If you've ever questioned whether He hears the cries you're too tired to speak, He hears them. If you've ever thought that your suffering went unnoticed, remember this. Heaven keeps record of every injustice done to the innocent. Every seed of love you planted. Every moment you chose peace over chaos. None of it was in vain. Every insult, every tear, every silent scream. God took note. And when the time was right, He answered. It wasn't a loud prayer. It didn't come with shouting or pleading or raised hands. It was quiet, barely a whisper, really. She was sitting in the same room she had cried in so many times before. Heart bruised, spirit weary. But this time, Something inside her felt different. She didn't ask for the narcissist to love her better. She didn't ask for another chance to fix what had already broken her. This time, all she asked for was clarity and peace. That was it. God, if this is not where I'm meant to be, if this is not love, if this is not from you, then show me. Not loudly, not through pain. Just show me. Please. I just want peace. And heaven heard. In that moment, though she didn't know it yet, the shift began. Not in him, not in the situation, but in her. Something inside her spirit started breaking free. That simple prayer, birthed from exhaustion rather than desperation, reached a place in heaven that long, detailed begging never could. Because it wasn't just a request. It was surrender. She wasn't asking God to change the narcissist anymore. She was asking God to reveal the truth. And when you ask heaven to expose what's hidden, it does. Slowly, gently, but without fail. Within days, the veil began to lift. Conversations that once confused her became crystal clear. Patterns she used to excuse stood out like flashing warnings. Her body reacted differently, tense around his presence, calm when he left. God was answering, not with thunder, but with deep knowing. The narcissist hadn't changed. She had. And that shift frightened him more than anything. Because the control he once held over her, emotional, mental, spiritual, was slipping. And she wasn't even fighting anymore. She was just seeing. And when the blindfold comes off, you can never go back to sleep. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain. She just started listening. To her spirit, to the patterns, to the stillness inside her that had begun to speak louder than his chaos. And that stillness, that was God, speaking in the quiet, affirming what she already felt but had been too afraid to accept. This is not love. This is not peace. This is not for you. It wasn't rejection. It was redirection. And even though she felt sadness, it was laced with something new. Clarity. A sacred kind of clarity that comes only when God has decided that enough is enough. The years of confusion, the silent wars, the emotional exhaustion, none of it had been ignored. God had watched her stay far longer than she should have. Not because she was weak, but because her heart was strong and loyal and full of hope. But even heaven has boundaries when it comes to his daughters. There is a point where divine mercy steps in and says, no more. You've done enough. You've endured enough. Now come out. And that's exactly what began to unfold. One moment at a time. No grand finale. No big, dramatic scene. Just her walking away. Not physically at first, but emotionally, spiritually. The ties began to loosen. The words no longer cut. The guilt no longer stuck. The fear no longer controlled. He could feel it. The narcissist could feel the shift, even if he couldn't explain it. The supply was slipping through his fingers. His mirror, once shining back the reflection he wanted to see, was cracking. And for the first time, she didn't try to fix it. She didn't try to prove her worth. She didn't try to earn his love. She simply let go. And heaven kept moving. Doors she never thought she could walk through began opening. Energy returned to her body. Dreams returned to her sleep. Peace, sweet, deep peace, began to settle into her bones. It wasn't loud or showy. It was sacred, quiet, personal. This is how God works when he says enough. Not through chaos, but through clarity. Not through punishment, but through protection. And while the world still couldn't see everything she had been through, God could. And that was enough. Heaven's enough doesn't always look like revenge or wrath. Sometimes it looks like rest. Sometimes it looks like walking away and never looking back. Sometimes it looks like healing in silence while the world thinks nothing ever happened. And that's okay. Because when God steps in, he doesn't just pull you out. He pulls you upward. Into wholeness. Into truth. Into the version of yourself that remembers how loved you really are. So if you've ever reached that place where your spirit whispered, God, I can't do this anymore. Know that you were heard. And if your heart is tired, if your soul is weary, if your prayer sounds more like a sigh than a sentence, know that heaven doesn't need volume to respond. God moves for the broken, the quiet, the ones who think they've run out of words. He did it for her. He'll do it for you. Because heaven always says enough at the exact right moment. And when it does, everything changes. At first, it was subtle. So subtle, in fact, that she almost missed it. A strange restlessness in her soul. A discomfort that made her question things she once defended. The same words from the narcissist, the same apologies, the same charm. It no longer landed the same way. It began with little things. The way her body felt tired after every interaction. The way her laughter didn't sound like her anymore. She noticed her prayers had changed. They weren't just about fixing the relationship or softening his heart. They were whispers for clarity, for release, for peace. Her dreams, once filled with hope, now carried warnings. Doors that once flung open with opportunity began to shut quietly in front of her. The people she used to call suddenly felt distant. The things that once brought her joy now brought her heaviness. She tried to explain it to herself. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe it was just stress. But deep down, she knew something sacred was happening. God was shifting the ground beneath her feet, removing every crutch she leaned on, peeling her away from the very thing that was draining her spirit. It didn't feel like a rescue at first. It felt like confusion, like isolation, but it was divine protection, dressed as rejection. God was breaking her attachment, piece by piece, not out of cruelty, but because he had something better, something holier, something peaceful. She would feel it in the silence after a fight, in the ache of waking up next to someone who made her feel invisible, in the mirror, where she no longer recognized her reflection. The pain wasn't random anymore. It was directional. Every unanswered prayer, every closed door, every moment of discomfort, it was God gently and firmly nudging her out, pulling her back to herself, back to him. Her spirit knew, even before her mind caught up, that she couldn't stay. Not if she wanted to grow. Not if she wanted to live. That's the thing about divine timing. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It makes your joy shrink. It dries up the places you used to drink from. It removes the taste from what used to satisfy you. And eventually, the signs became too clear to ignore. Her spirit wasn't breaking anymore. It was awakening. The fear of leaving was still there, but the fear of staying started to outweigh it. She realized she could no longer dim her light just to make him comfortable in the dark. So she stopped rationalizing the pain. She stopped praying for the narcissist to change and started asking God to show her the truth. That's when everything became undeniable. The masks fell. The manipulation got louder. The disrespect turned colder. And God's signs became impossible to unsee. It wasn't just a breakup. It was a calling. A holy unraveling. God was not asking her to fight harder. He was asking her to surrender. To trust that leaving wasn't weakness. It was obedience. To trust that peace was possible, even after years of chaos. And though she didn't know what life would look like on the other side, she knew she could no longer stay where her spirit was dying. She didn't leave out of anger. She left because staying meant betraying herself. And when she walked away, she didn't slam the door. She simply stopped opening it, because the signs were clear. And this time, she listened. It didn't happen in a loud moment. Not with shouting. Not with tears. It wasn't a dramatic exit or a grand confrontation. It came quietly, softly, like a long, tired exhale after holding her breath for too long. She just knew. She had nothing left to prove. No more arguments to win. No more explanations to give. She didn't need closure because the chaos had already closed something inside her. It was the day she stopped begging for basic kindness. The day she stopped hoping he would finally see her. Finally love her in the way she'd been pouring out so freely. Her love had become a lesson, not a bridge. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. She had been, once, furious, devastated, confused. But that day, there was no fight left in her. Only stillness. Only clarity. Only peace. She didn't cry when she walked away. She had cried enough. Cried through nights of being gaslit. Cried when she caught herself apologizing for things that weren't her fault. Cried every time she made excuses for him, just to avoid accepting the truth. He was never going to change. Not for her. Not for anyone. And she deserved better than endless trying. That morning, something in her spirit shifted. She made her coffee like always, sat in the same chair, looked at the same wall, but everything felt different. Her heart wasn't heavy. Her body didn't tremble with dread. She didn't rehearse another speech or plan a new way to make him understand. She was done. And for the first time in a long time, she felt free. It wasn't the freedom that comes with escape. It was the freedom that comes with alignment, with surrender, with releasing something you once prayed would work. Letting go doesn't always feel good at first, but this time, it did. It felt holy. Sacred. Like God was whispering, "You did all you could. Now rest." And she did. Not physically, but spiritually. She rested from trying to be enough for someone who was never meant to hold her. She stopped shrinking herself to avoid conflict. She stopped carrying the emotional weight of two people. She stopped chasing a version of love that only existed in her imagination. Because real love doesn't have to be begged for. It doesn't make you question your worth every day. It doesn't drain the very life out of you. That day, she realized that holding on had been hurting her more than the idea of letting go ever could. She had been clinging to hope, but not the kind God gives. This hope was toxic. It was hope wrapped in fear. Fear of starting over. Fear of being alone. Fear of being too much or not enough. But God doesn't operate in fear. He operates in truth. And the truth was, she had been keeping herself stuck, waiting for a man to be something he never was capable of being. So, she released it. Not with bitterness, but with reverence, with grace, with love for herself. She whispered, "Thank you for the lessons," and walked away, not just from him, but from the version of herself that tolerated emotional starvation and called it love. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need him to regret it. Her healing wasn't about him anymore. It was about her, about reclaiming her voice, her soul, her joy, and God met her in that moment, not in thunder or lightning, but in quiet peace, in the warmth that filled her chest, in the smile she gave herself in the mirror, in the silence that, for once, didn't feel empty, but full. Full of possibilities, full of new beginnings, full of her own presence. She thought the hardest part would be walking away, but it wasn't. The hardest part had been staying, year after year, praying for someone to love her the way she already loved him. She had already been through the hardest part, and now, she was just walking into peace. Peace isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's just the absence of fear. The absence of walking on eggshells. The absence of explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. That day, peace wasn't fireworks. It was her spirit saying, "Finally." It was her soul whispering, "You're safe now." Letting go didn't make her weak. It made her whole. She wasn't giving up. She was choosing herself. Choosing healing. Choosing the kind of love that starts from within and radiates outward. The kind that God designed her for. Not the counterfeit kind she had been surviving. That day, the chains broke. Not all at once, but enough to breathe. Enough to see the sky again. Enough to remember who she was before the manipulation. Before the confusion. Before the self-doubt. And though the road ahead would still be long and tender, she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He never thought she'd leave. Not really. He assumed she'd always be there, apologizing, explaining, staying quiet to keep the peace. But the day she walked away, something shifted in the air. For the first time, Silence spoke louder than any word she ever said. And the narcissist, once so sure of his grip, began to feel a chill he couldn't name. At first, he tried to pretend it didn't matter. He told others she was crazy, too emotional, or ungrateful. But deep inside, he felt it. The emptiness. No more instant validation. No one left to feed his ego. No more daily control disguised as love. Suddenly, the mirror he once used to reflect his own power was gone. And without her light, his darkness became obvious. He panicked. Not because he missed her, but because he missed the control. He missed the version of himself he could only maintain with her energy. But God didn't let her go back this time. God didn't let her feel sorry or second-guess herself. In fact, everything that used to pull at her heart now made her feel nothing. That's how you know God steps in, when the soul no longer aches for what once broke it. And while he spun in confusion, replaying the last words she said, trying new manipulations and false apologies, she sat in quiet peace. Not because she was over it completely, but because something divine had closed the door and sealed it shut. He knocked. She didn't answer. He sent messages, photos, even guilt-laced memories, but there was no opening. God wasn't allowing it, because this time, it wasn't just about healing, it was about protection. The narcissist began to crumble in private. Rage turned into desperation. He started reaching out to old sources, but it wasn't the same. No one gave him the fuel she did. No one believed in him the way she once had. His image started to crack. The charm lost its shine. And while she bloomed in silence, he unraveled in noise. People began to see through his mask. Relationships he built on lies began to collapse. And in the quiet, late at night, when no one was around to pretend for, he felt it. That hollow ache that comes when God lifts his hand of grace. You see, while he played games, God was watching. And when she finally obeyed that inner voice to leave, heaven moved. The divine protection that had been waiting to cover her only needed one step of faith. And the moment she took it, her peace returned, and his peace disappeared. That's the cost of mistreating someone God sent to love you. That's the consequence of mocking a soul with divine purpose. So while he paces, she rests. While he spirals, she rises. This is what happens when God removes his daughters from destructive places. He lets the chaos fall exactly where it belongs. Not as revenge, but as divine justice. Not as punishment, but as consequence. And the narcissist, once so confident in his illusion, now sees the truth. He didn't just lose a person, he lost a covering, a shield, a mirror of what he could have become if only he had chosen love over control. But he didn't. And God didn't stop the fallout. Because the day she walked away, it wasn't just a leaving. It was heaven reclaiming what hell tried to own. There was a time when he could snap his fingers, and she'd come running. A slight shift in tone, a fabricated apology, a breadcrumb of affection, and her heart would bend just enough to stay. He knew her triggers. He knew her softness. He counted on the guilt she carried, the hope she clung to, the way she always wanted to believe in the good, even when it was killing her. But something had changed. Drastically. Suddenly, the tears didn't work. The half-hearted promises felt cheap. The love bombing she used to fall for now felt sickening. She wasn't falling for it anymore. And it wasn't because she became cold. It was because she became covered by something greater than her pain. Something stronger than her trauma. God had stepped in. Quietly at first. Through late-night whispers. Through strangers who spoke the truth. Through doors that started to slam in her face until she had no choice but to stand up and see the pattern. And once she saw it, really saw it, everything changed. The spell broke. What once kept her entangled now repulsed her. His words, once powerful, now sounded empty. His presence, once magnetic, now felt toxic. It was as if heaven reached down and pulled the wool from her eyes. And the narcissist could feel it. He sensed it the moment his old tricks stopped working. He tried to rewind the script, sprinkling in just enough affection, just enough nostalgia, just enough guilt. But it all fell flat. Because when God removes the blindfold, no amount of charm can cover the truth. She wasn't responding, and he couldn't figure out why. The same lines, the same tactics, now met with silence, indifference, peace. And that peace shook him, because the silence wasn't bitter. It was healed. It wasn't vengeful. It was done. That's when he realized the most terrifying truth of all. He no longer had access, not to her mind, her heart, or her spirit. God had stepped in and drawn a line, a boundary not built from bitterness but from grace, a divine protection that said, this soul is no longer available for manipulation. And the narcissist couldn't reach her, not because she blocked him, but because heaven did. That's the thing about spiritual warfare. Once God steps into the battle, no human strategy stands a chance. No guilt, no gaslighting, no rewriting of history can break through what God has sealed. And what used to confuse her now made perfect sense. What used to hurt her now couldn't touch her. He kept trying, but every door he knocked on had been divinely closed. Every message he sent was swallowed by silence. Every attempt to re-enter was like pushing against a wall of fire. Because this time, she wasn't fighting alone. God had taken over. And when God takes over, manipulation meets its match. Control loses its grip. And the narcissist, once a master of deception, becomes powerless. Not because she got stronger on her own, but because she finally let God be her strength. And now, she stands, not as a victim, but as someone who survived the fire and came out golden. And the narcissist, he stands outside, watching the light he once dimmed become a flame he can no longer touch. That's what happens when God steps in. Everything toxic falls flat, and everything true begins to rise. She used to think walking away was weakness, that leaving meant failure, that if she could just hold on a little longer, love a little harder, explain herself one more time, maybe then things would change. Maybe then the chaos would settle and he'd see her heart. But every time she tried, she lost a little more of herself. The smiles became masks, the apologies became patterns, and her prayers turned into desperate cries that echoed in silence. She wasn't living, she was surviving. Barely, but something sacred started stirring in her spirit. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like a soft hand on her back urging her to stand, to look around, to see what had been happening all along. The emotional control, the gaslighting, the way her soul had been slowly starved of peace, of clarity, of joy. She realized she wasn't crazy. She was being controlled. And suddenly, staying didn't feel brave anymore. It felt wrong. That's when God whispered the truth. You weren't made to beg for peace. You were made to live in it. And so, she made a quiet decision. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but out of reverence, for her soul, for her sanity, for her connection to God. She walked away, not with drama, not with a scream, but with a sacred stillness. And in that stillness, something broke, and something began. The fog lifted, the confusion faded, and for the first time in years, she could hear herself again. Her real self, not the version that had been edited, shamed, or silenced, but the one God handcrafted long before the pain began. That was the beginning of healing. Not when she got an apology, not when he changed, but when she stopped waiting for closure and chose clarity instead. Healing didn't come in a rush. It came slowly, through quiet mornings and whispered prayers, through tears that finally had space to fall, through laughter that returned like a long-lost friend. And as she healed, she began to understand. Walking away wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of the real one. Because when control ends, God begins. And in the absence of manipulation, her spirit could breathe, her mind could rest, Her heart could start beating in alignment with heaven again. No more second-guessing. No more shrinking. Just becoming. Becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Whole, holy, and held. People asked her, "How did you do it?" And she'd smile, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Because she finally realized, healing isn't found in fixing someone else. It's found in finding yourself. And when she found herself, she found God. Not the version of God she had cried to while begging for someone else to love her, but the real God, the one who never left, who always saw, and who gently led her back to life. That's the sacred truth. Healing begins where control ends, when the noise dies down, when the strings are cut, when the soul is finally free to rise. And now, she no longer walks in fear. She walks in faith. Not bitter, but better. Not broken, but reborn. Because healing didn't happen when she was rescued. It happened when she realized she didn't need to be. She was already chosen. Already loved. Already enough. She didn't know what would come after the storm. She only knew she couldn't stay. The narcissist had taken so much. Her voice, her time, her spirit. Every day had become a war between what she felt and what she was told to feel. She was told she was too much, then not enough, that she caused the chaos, that she imagined the wounds, that her silence meant peace, when it really meant she had no energy left to explain herself again. But the moment she walked away, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, empty, quiet, uncertain. What she didn't realize then was that heaven had been watching. See, what the narcissist tried to destroy, God had already planned to rebuild. Stronger, purer, divine. Because God doesn't just remove, He replaces. At first, it felt like loss. But it was holy subtraction. The stripping away of the fake, the toxic, the false comfort. And in that empty space, God began His sacred work. No more walking on eggshells. No more bending backwards for someone who only saw her as a mirror to feed their ego. Now came peace. Peace that didn't come from approval. Peace that didn't depend on anyone changing. Peace that flowed like still waters inside her soul. She started sleeping again. Smiling without guilt. Waking up without fear. And that wasn't a coincidence. It was divine replacement. God took the chaos and gave her calm. He took the lies and gave her truth. He took the manipulation and gave her clarity. And then came protection. Not just physical, but spiritual. Things that once tempted her, now repelled her. Phone calls went unanswered. Doors she used to force open, they stayed shut, and she didn't mind. God surrounded her with boundaries she used to beg others to respect. Now, those boundaries were honored, not by demand, but by divine alignment. She wasn't guarded. She was guarded by God. And in that safe space, her purpose woke up. The same voice that had been silenced began to speak again. First in whispers, then in bold declarations. She started remembering who she was before the gaslighting, before the guilt, before the grief. Her creativity returned. Her laughter deepened. She remembered her dreams, not the ones she twisted to fit someone else's life, but the ones God had planted in her before the pain ever began. That's the thing about divine replacement. It doesn't just restore what was lost. It gives you more than you ever thought you deserved. God brought people who saw her soul, not just a service. Opportunities flowed without her striving. Healing poured in without needing closure. She didn't chase love anymore. She attracted it. Because now, she loved herself. What the narcissist tried to steal, her peace, her confidence, her worth, God returned, multiplied. And in the quiet moments, she'd smile. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it no longer had power. That chapter was over, and what replaced it was divine. They thought she was finished, that the silence meant defeat, that the broken pieces were the end of her. But they didn't know. Sometimes God lets you fall apart. so he can build something the enemy can't touch. She cried. Oh, she cried hard. Not just tears, but soul-level mourning. For the years lost, the trust betrayed, the dreams that shattered in her hands, while she still smiled for everyone else. The betrayal nearly crushed her. The narcissist didn't just manipulate her mind. They drained her spirit, twisted her reality, made her question her worth, made her think she was too sensitive, too emotional, too much. But what they didn't know was that her breakdown was only the prelude to her breakthrough. Because just when it looked like darkness had won, God stepped in, not with lightning, not with noise, but with a still, small whisper. This is not your ending. It's your becoming. And for the first time in a long time, she listened, not to the voice of the narcissist, not to the fae, but to the truth pulsing deep in her spirit.